Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Welcome to the Sit, Walk, Work podcast, a show about paying attention. My name is Dominic, your host, and in today's episode, we're going to get into a talk around the idea of self-tolerance. So what is self-tolerance? I mean, it's not a question that we go around pondering, I suspect. I know I never really did. This idea was sparked because I took myself on an artist date and went to the local Holocaust and Intolerance Museum. And in touring that, it really got me thinking about this idea of being tolerant and how we show up to meet others that are different than us, right? It's easy for our human species to drop things in categories and boxes and call them different, missing the fact that humanity is the undercurrent that binds us all together. Like, we'll just skip it. Pretend it's not even there. Now, if I logically ask you about it, you know it's there. But it isn't how we frame most of our decisions and our thoughts. It can be easy to put people in the other category because it enables us to treat them differently. And if we had to see them the way we saw ourselves, we might do something like empathy or compassion, or maybe even understanding. And so I see this idea of self-tolerance as something that we should look to improve. I mean, the word tolerance isn't a word thrown around often because one of the initial connotations that comes with that is that it means to tolerate bad behavior towards us from other people. So you see the idea that maybe someone's taking advantage of you. Tolerance would be you allowing that to happen. But self-tolerance is not that at all. It's how you interact with you. So when you scale it back like that, and think about the relationship you're cultivating with you. So I was talking to my yoga class about this week. And I realized that when I speak to my classes, I speak to myself. So really, it's like I'm talking to myself about things that I need to know, but I happen to be sharing it in front of a room full of students. And in this case, on this podcast. And one of the things I happen to mention is how challenging it is to kind of begin to cultivate a space within ourselves to be tolerant of ourselves in a variety of conditions. And one of the ways that you can really start to see this appear in your life or even begin to affect it is acknowledging the way that you talk to yourself. That little inner critic voice that's in there narrating your life every day, you and I both know is not often the most kind voice. Hell, I'd argue that it might not even be your voice. It might have been planted there from someone who repeated something that was really probably not true over and over again until the point that you believed it. Till you took it in and made it a part of you, and we call that your identity. And like, I could even say this, at least from my experience, there was a point, I've gotten better, but there was a point where I would be shamefully embarrassed if someone heard me talking to myself the way I did, right? You would never do that to a friend or somebody you love to care about, but man, we will go hard inside of our own heads for when we mess up or when we're not perfect or when we kind of do anything that is less than ideal. Now, here's the thing about this yoga, meditation, contemplation practice. If you spend enough time in your body and in your mind, one of the byproducts that begins to unfold is tolerance. Like, it begins to bubble up, right? Maybe the voice gets a little softer when you don't stick the balance posture that you wanted to do. Or when you fidgeted in meditation practice or your mind wandered, you really took to heart this idea of letting it go and beginning again. Tolerance could be mirrored right next to the word compassion, but you're softer with yourself. You're a little less rigid. And so you're meeting yourself differently when you show up. Some days you'll step into a yoga room, get on your mat with an intention in your mind of going hard, doing all the big postures, taking it to the max, balls to the wall. Yeah, and then your body's like, no, we're not doing that. Not today. And then you, instead of falling into the pattern of fighting with yourself or treating yourself poorly, you don't. You relax. You give yourself a little grace, a little acceptance. Hell, you might even be a little kind. And then instead of resisting, you start to work with the situation. And that's when new opportunities unfold. And you see the results of being a little more tolerant with yourself. Now, if I were to ask any of you, if I were to see you in the street, recognize you and ask you this question, I can almost guarantee you'd say yes. What's the question? Do you want to know how to be more compassionate and understanding with others? To try and see things through other people's eyes. Like, man, wouldn't it be nice to do that? Because we all know that's valuable. That's a good skill to have. But no one really tells us how to get it. Well, here's the first clue that I've learned. Is you need to learn how to do that with yourself first. To tolerate yourself in all of its dynamics, in all of its capacities, the best and worst moments, without shame, without judgment, without all the negative connotations and stories you have. Because when you can do that, and I mean do that genuinely, not forcing anything, but when you can just do that in just a nice way, then when you move through the world and you see others and you see them hurting and you see them doing things that maybe you no longer do to yourself, you go, oh, I know what that is. I've seen that before. I've seen it in myself. And that's the place your empathy is birthed from, a place of knowing yourself well enough that you can see it in others. And then extending the hand of compassion and grace and tolerance because you remember what it was like when you didn't know the information you now have. And in that way, your tolerance is not a self-centered thing, right? It transcends you. It radiates beyond you. The merit of the work that you do on the mat or the cushion starts to support all other beings so that they can be open and available to the freedom that you now know and understand what you understand. Because what's the opposite of tolerance? It's intolerance. And I don't know if you know this, but if you look at history, You look at all the moments where intolerance won the day. And it wasn't one fell swoop. It was fickle. It was slow. It happened right in front of people's eyes, where hatred and nihilism became commonplace. People just thought it was an isolated event. And by the time anyone picked up their head to realize where they were headed, they were already in a dark place. These things are fickle. They demand our attention, to know where we are moving and steering ourselves. Because otherwise we might find ourselves on a course we didn't really want to be on, and wondering how we got there. The line between good and evil, light and dark, these aren't hard boundaries. So don't fool yourself into believing they are. They're attitudes, and they're being cultivated, or they're being destroyed based on the choices you make. So, I choose to be a little more tolerant with myself because it's good for me. But I also know it's good for the world, and I'm certainly good with that. Feel free to like, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to interact with me, hop on over to Substack, where I'm building a community of like-minded individuals to study and discuss all things pertaining to the idea of paying attention. And until I see you on the mat or the cushion, or I drop into your ear space in an episode, I hope you're well, and I hope you are compassionate and kind with yourself.